The trade that shocked the NBA. Jaylen Brown spent a decade building his legacy in Boston. He became a champion. He became a Finals MVP. He became one of the faces of the Celtics organization. But in one shocking move, everything changed. The player who once stood as one of Philadelphia's biggest obstacles is now wearing a 76 ERS jersey, standing beside the very superstar he once criticized. And that superstar is Joel Embiid. The NBA world was stunned when the Philadelphia 76ers acquired Jaylen Brown from the Boston Celtics in a blockbuster trade. Boston sent away a franchise cornerstone and received Paul George along with future draft assets in return. On paper, it was a basketball decision, a move designed to reshape the future of both teams. But behind the numbers, behind the contracts, and behind the championship expectations, there was a much bigger question. Could two elite players with years of competitive history actually become teammates? Because this was not a normal trade. Jaylen Brown was not going to a rebuilding team where expectations were low. He was sent directly into the heart of one of Boston's greatest rivalries. He was joining the Philadelphia 76ers, a franchise he had battled against in the playoffs multiple times throughout his career. And waiting for him in that locker room was Joel Embiid, the same Joel Embiid who had been on the opposite side of countless playoff battles. The same player Brown had spent years trying to stop, the same player who became the center of controversy after their most recent postseason matchup. Just months before the trade happened, Brown was still wearing Celtics green and speaking publicly about Embiid after a painful playoff exit. Following Boston's loss to Philadelphia, Brown criticized Embiid's style of play and questioned the way the MVP-level center earned certain calls from officials. His message was clear: respect the talent, but frustration remained. At that moment, nobody could have imagined that these two players would soon be expected to fight for the same championship. But the NBA changes fast. One day you are fighting against someone. The next day, you are expected to trust them with your career goals. And that is exactly where Philadelphia found itself. The 76ers did not make this trade because they wanted another star name on the roster. They made this move because they believed Jaylen Brown could be the missing piece beside Joel Embiid and Tyrese Maxey. They believed Brown could reduce the pressure on Embiid. They believed his scoring, toughness, and playoff experience could finally give Philadelphia the championship formula it has been searching for years. But talent alone does not win championships. History has proven that. Teams filled with superstar players have failed because chemistry broke down, trust disappeared, and egos became bigger than the mission. And now, Philadelphia faces the ultimate test. Can Jaylen Brown and Joel Embiid leave their rivalry behind? Can two players who once battled, criticized, and questioned each other become the foundation of a championship team? Because if they succeed, this trade could completely change the balance of power in the NBA. But if the tension is real, if the past is still alive, and if trust never develops, this could become one of the biggest missed opportunities in recent league history. The question is no longer whether Jaylen Brown and Joel Embiid have enough talent. They do. The real question is whether they can put everything else aside and become something greater together. Before we break down the history, the controversy, and what this means for the future of the 76ers, I want to hear from you. Where are you watching from right now? Do you believe Jaylen Brown and Joel Embiid can actually become a championship duo? Or do you think this partnership is already in trouble? If you think they will succeed, type 1 in the comments. If you think this chemistry problem could destroy Philadelphia's title hopes, type 2. And if you enjoy deep NBA stories, breaking news, and the drama behind the game, make sure to subscribe and stay with us because this story is only getting started. The words that changed everything. Before Jaylen Brown ever became Joel Embiid's teammate, he was one of his biggest problems. For years, Brown represented everything Philadelphia hated about Boston. He was the young star who grew into a playoff warrior. He was the player who kept standing between the 76 ERs and their dream of reaching the top of the Eastern Conference. And every time Boston and Philadelphia met, the battle became more personal. The rivalry between these two organizations was built on decades of history. But during the modern NBA era, Jaylen Brown and Joel Embiid became two of the main characters in that story. Brown had experienced success against Philadelphia before. The Celtics had eliminated the Sixers multiple times during his career, creating frustration for a franchise that desperately wanted to break through. But every rivalry eventually reaches a turning point. And for Brown and Embiid, that moment came during their most recent playoff battle. Philadelphia finally defeated Boston. For Embiid, it was a statement. For the Sixers, it was proof that they could finally overcome one of their biggest obstacles. But for Brown, it was a painful ending. The loss was still fresh when Brown went public with his frustrations. Instead of simply accepting defeat, he questioned some of the things that happened during the series. One of his biggest criticisms was directed toward Joel Embiid. Brown acknowledged Embiid's greatness. There was no denying the talent. Embiid was an MVP-level player, one of the most dominant big men of his generation. But Brown also believed Embiid benefited from certain calls because of the way he played. The word that immediately caught everyone's attention was simple: flopping. That accusation changed the entire conversation. Because criticizing an opponent during a playoff battle is one thing, but becoming teammates with that same opponent months later creates a completely different situation. Imagine spending years trying to defeat someone. Imagine studying their weaknesses, fighting against them physically and mentally, and believing they are standing in the way of your championship dreams. Then suddenly, the same person is sitting beside you in the locker room. The same person you criticized. The same person you competed against. The same person you now need to trust. That is the challenge facing Philadelphia. And the timing made everything even more complicated. Brown's comments did not come years ago. They came at the height of emotion, immediately after a heartbreaking playoff loss. Those moments often create the strongest reactions because athletes are competitors first. They spend their entire lives trying to win. When that goal disappears, emotions take over. But NBA locker rooms do not forget easily. Players remember what was said. They remember who questioned them. They remember who challenged their reputation. And Joel Embiid is no different. For years, Embiid has carried the weight of Philadelphia's championship hopes. Every postseason failure, every injury concern, every disappointing ending has followed him. Now, after years of searching for the perfect teammate, Philadelphia brought in Jaylen Brown, a player talented enough to change the franchise, a player capable of taking pressure away from Embiid, a player who could finally help him reach the championship stage. But before they can win together, they have to answer a much bigger question. Can respect replace rivalry? Because championship teams are not built only on talent. They are built on trust. And trust becomes difficult when the person standing beside you is someone who once questioned your game in front of the entire basketball world. This is why the Jaylen Brown and Joel Embiid partnership is one of the most fascinating stories in the NBA. It is not just about points, rebounds, or playoff matchups. It is about two elite competitors trying to transform years of tension into a championship connection. And the next chapter made the situation even more interesting. Because after the trade became official, people started asking one question: did Jaylen Brown and Joel Embiid actually talk? Or did Philadelphia just create a superstar pairing built on silence? The silence inside Philadelphia. The trade was official, the jerseys changed, the headlines exploded. Jaylen Brown was now a Philadelphia 76 ERs player. On paper, everything looked perfect. Philadelphia had added another superstar. Joel Embiid finally had another elite scorer beside him. Tyrese Maxey had another offensive weapon who could take pressure off his shoulders. The basketball reasons were obvious, but then came the question that everyone wanted answered. What happened between Jaylen Brown and Joel Embiid behind closed doors? Because, according to NBA Hall of Famer Tracy McGrady, something was missing. A conversation. McGrady, who has been close to Brown and has served as one of his mentors, revealed on a podcast that Brown and Embiid had apparently not spoken after the blockbuster trade. Not a long conversation, not a private meeting, not even a simple phone call, according to McGrady's understanding at the time. And that detail immediately caught the attention of the basketball world, because this was not a normal teammate situation. This was not two players joining forces after years of friendship. This was two superstars with history. McGrady pointed out that Brown had already reached out to other new teammates, including Tyrese Maxey and young players on the roster. But the biggest question remained: why had there apparently been no direct connection with Joel Embiid? The person who mattered most, the person who carried the franchise for years, the person whose success would be directly connected to Brown's own future. That silence created speculation. Some fans believed it showed that there was still tension between the two players. Others argued that NBA players do not always need public conversations immediately after a trade. They believe professional athletes understand that emotions, business decisions, and competition are complicated. But the timing made people wonder. If Philadelphia truly believed this was the beginning of a championship era, shouldn't the two biggest stars have been the first ones to build a relationship? Because chemistry does not begin when the regular season starts. It begins before the first game. It begins with communication. It begins with trust. And that is why McGrady's comments became such a major storyline. However, another report quickly created even more confusion. A Sixers insider later pushed back against the idea that Brown and Embiid had not spoken. According to that report, the two stars had communicated, and the idea that they had completely ignored each other was inaccurate. Suddenly, there were two completely different versions of the story. One side suggested tension, the other side suggested everything was fine. And that created an even bigger mystery, because neither Brown nor Embiid immediately stepped forward to explain the situation themselves. There was no dramatic statement, no emotional interview, no public message saying, "We are ready to win together." Instead, the basketball world was left analyzing every report, every quote, and every small detail. And when two superstar players remained silent, people naturally start filling in the blanks. The truth is simple. Maybe the two players had already moved past everything. Maybe they had talked privately and decided not to make it a public story. Or maybe there was still unfinished business between two competitors who spent years fighting against each other. Nobody outside that locker room truly knew, but one thing was clear. Philadelphia had created one of the most talented teams in the NBA. And at the same time, they created one of the most fascinating chemistry questions in the league. Because talent can make a team dangerous, but trust is what makes a team special. And before Jaylen Brown and Joel Embiid could chase a championship together, they had to figure out how to stop being rivals first. Rivalry turned into partnership. The story between Jaylen Brown and Joel Embiid did not start with a trade. It started with years of battle. For nearly a decade, Brown represented the Boston Celtics, while Embiid carried the hopes of the Philadelphia 76ers. Every playoff meeting between these two teams carried pressure, emotion, and history. Brown was one of Philadelphia's biggest obstacles. Embiid was one of Boston's biggest challenges. They spent years trying to defeat each other. They studied each other's weaknesses. They understood exactly what the other side brought to the court. But now, everything has changed. The player Brown once tried to eliminate from the playoffs is now the player he must trust. The opponent he criticized is now the teammate who shares the same championship dream. That is the strange reality of the NBA. Rivals become teammates. Enemies become partners. But the hardest part is not learning a new offense or adjusting to a new system. The hardest part is building trust. Because both Brown and Embiid are elite competitors. Their confidence made them stars, but that same confidence can create challenges when two strong personalities share leadership. Philadelphia is betting that their competitive fire can become an advantage. They believe the same intensity that made them opponents can now make them stronger together. But history has shown that talent does not win championships alone. The best teams are built when stars learn how to sacrifice, communicate, and put the mission above themselves. For Brown and Embiid, the past created the rivalry. Now the future will decide whether they can create a legacy together. Jaylen Brown's reputation problem. Jaylen Brown has always been one of the NBA's most interesting personalities. His talent has never been questioned. His work ethic has never been questioned. But his personality and his words have often created debate. Some fans see Brown as a confident superstar who is not afraid to speak his mind. Others believe his honesty sometimes creates unnecessary distraction. One example came during Summer League when Brown's private comments about Bronny James became public. The moment created a major discussion around the league. Some criticized Brown. Others defended him, saying a private conversation was taken out of context. Brown later clarified his position and showed support for Bronny's development. But the moment became another example of how quickly NBA stories can grow. Now, after joining Philadelphia, his past comments about Embiid have returned to the spotlight. The question is not whether Brown can play. Everyone knows he can. The question is whether he can build the relationships needed to lead a championship team. Because being a superstar is not only about performing, it is about trust. And in Philadelphia, Brown will have to prove that he can turn his strong personality into a strength instead of a distraction. The Embiid factor, for years, Joel Embiid has carried Philadelphia. Every season came with the same pressure. Win a championship, prove the doubters wrong, show that individual greatness can become team success. But the Sixers have struggled to find the right formula. They have added stars. They have changed supporting casts. They have made big moves. Yet the championship has remained out of reach. That is why Jaylen Brown is such an important addition. Brown gives Embiid something he has rarely had. Another superstar capable of carrying responsibility. Brown can create offense. He can handle playoff pressure. He can reduce the physical and mental burden on Embiid. On paper, this is exactly what Philadelphia needed. But talent is only part of the equation. Embiid must trust Brown. Brown must understand Embiid's leadership. Both players must accept that the championship goal is bigger than individual pride. Because the greatest partnerships in NBA history were not built because players were identical. They were built because players learned how to complement each other. Championship expectations. The 76ers did not make this trade to become better. They made this trade to become contenders. With Joel Embiid, Jaylen Brown, and Tyrese Maxey, Philadelphia suddenly has one of the most talented cores in the NBA. Embiid brings dominance. Maxey brings speed and creativity. Brown brings toughness and championship experience. On paper, this team has everything. But every championship team faces the same challenge. Can great players become a great team? The NBA is filled with examples of talented rosters that failed because chemistry disappeared. The playoffs expose everything. Every mistake matters. Every relationship is tested. That is where Brown and Embiid must prove themselves. If they build trust, Philadelphia could become one of the most dangerous teams in the East. If they fail, the biggest problem may not come from their opponent. It may come from within. The truth behind the rumors. The biggest mystery surrounding Jaylen Brown and Joel Embiid is not their basketball ability. Everyone knows what they can do on the court. The mystery is what happened between them away from the camera. After Tracy McGrady's comments created headlines, the NBA community immediately started searching for answers. Was there really tension? Had the two stars avoided each other? Or had the situation already been resolved privately? That uncertainty is what made the story explode. Because in today's NBA, silence can become its own headline. When players speak, fans analyze their words. When players stay quiet, fans analyze the silence. Every interview becomes a clue. Every body language moment becomes a discussion, and suddenly, a private relationship becomes a public storyline. Another report later suggested that Brown and Embiid had, in fact, communicated. That changed the conversation, but it did not completely end it. Because the question was no longer simply whether they had spoken. The bigger question became, what kind of conversation was it? Was it just a professional introduction? Or was it a real conversation where two competitors acknowledged their history and decided to move forward? Only Brown and Embiid know the answer, and that is an important reminder. Outside observers can analyze, reporters can investigate, fans can debate, but only the players inside that locker room truly understand the relationship. The danger for Philadelphia is allowing outside noise to become a distraction. Championship teams deal with pressure constantly. Every contender has rumors. Every superstar partnership faces criticism. The teams that survive are the ones that focus on what happens internally. Because basketball is not won on social media. It is not won through headline. It is won through trust, preparation, and sacrifice. For Brown and Embiid, the opportunity is still right in front of them. They do not have to erase their history. They simply have to create a new one, the moment that defines their future. Eventually, every NBA storyline reaches the same point. The talking stops. The rumors disappear, and the players have to prove everything on the court. That moment is coming for Jaylen Brown and Joel Embiid. The questions surrounding them will not be answered by interviews. They will not be answered by statements from executives. They will be answered during the biggest moments of the season. When the game is close, when the defense tightens, when the pressure becomes overwhelming. That is when trust matters most. Will Embiid look for Brown when the game is on the line? Will Brown embrace the responsibility of becoming another leader? Will both players understand that success requires sharing the spotlight? Those moments will define this partnership, because there is something unique about this situation. Both players have something to prove. Embiid wants to show that he can finally lead Philadelphia to the championship stage. Brown wants to prove that he can be the centerpiece of another contender and that questions about his leadership are unfair. Their motivations are different, but their goal is the same, a championship, and sometimes the best partnerships are built when two people realize they need each other. Brown does not need to replace Embiid. Embiid does not need to compete with Brown. They need to complete each other. The greatest teams in NBA history understood them. Superstars do not win because they are the only star. They win because they know when to trust someone else. Philadelphia has taken the biggest gamble of all. They have invested their future in two elite players who must choose teamwork over history. Now, the decision belongs to Brown and Embiid. They can allow the past to define them, or they can use the past as motivation, because sometimes the greatest NBA stories are not about how rivals defeat each other. They are about how rivals learn to win together. The lesson behind the drama. The story of Jaylen Brown and Joel Embiid is bigger than one trade. It is bigger than one comment. It is bigger than one rival. At its core, this is a story about change. Two players who spent years competing against each other are now facing the hardest challenge in professional sports. Not beating an opponent, but trusting a teammate. The NBA often focuses on talent. Who scores the most points? Who wins MVP awards? Who makes the biggest plays? But championships are not built only on talent. They are built on relationships. They are built on communication. They are built on the willingness to put personal pride aside for something greater. Jaylen Brown and Joel Embiid now have a choice. They can allow old battles, old words, and old frustrations to define their partnership. Or they can understand that every great team requires growth. The past cannot be changed. The comments cannot be erased. The playoff battles cannot be forgotten. But the future is still theirs to create. If they succeed, this trade will be remembered as one of the boldest moves in NBA history. People will look back and say, Philadelphia did not just acquire another star, they created a championship foundation. But if they fail, people will wonder whether the warning signs were visible from the beginning. That is what makes this story so fascinating. Nobody knows the ending yet. The basketball world can only watch. Because sometimes the difference between winning a championship and falling short is not talent. It is trust. It is respect. It is understanding that the person next to you is not your opponent anymore. They are your teammate. And for Jaylen Brown and Joel Embiid, That lesson could determine the future of an entire franchise. Now I want to hear from you. Do you believe Jaylen Brown and Joel Embiid can put their history behind them and lead Philadelphia to an NBA championship? Or do you think their past rivalry will eventually become a problem? Let us know your thoughts in the comment. If you enjoyed this NBA story, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more breaking NBA news, player stories, trades, and the biggest dramas happening around the league. Share this video with another basketball fan. Hit the like button and stay connected, because the NBA season is full of unexpected moments. The biggest stories are not always created by the games we watch. Sometimes they are created by the relationships behind them.